Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on climate resilient infrastructure, securing the future. We all know that infrastructure is essential to Africa's economic development, but it has to be designed and built with climate change in mind. I'm thrilled to moderate this distinguished panel of experts to discuss the opportunities for investment in climate resilient infrastructure and ways to promote the resilience of critical infrastructure in the face of climate change and other environmental challenges, and how, with all of this in mind, to promote economic growth and job creation. Thank you so much, my esteemed panelists, for joining today. We only have an hour, so we have to be straight to the point, I would say. I want to start by asking the question about opportunities to you, Mohamed Al-Ghanim, CEO of Hamad S. Al-Ghanim Group. You have designed and operated enormous infrastructure projects, primarily in the Middle East. What do you see as the opportunities to create and develop climate-sensitive and resilient infrastructure? Do you see opportunities?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel with such distinguished guests. I think the short answer is yes. There are significant opportunities that are available in Africa at this point in time. But I think the question is sort of not an existential question about whether there are opportunities, but rather how to ensure that these opportunities are created in a way that entices investors from across the world to actually be wanting to come to Africa, on the one hand. On the other hand, to ensure that there are actually risks that are de-risked at a certain point in time in order for these projects to actually move forward. So I think delving into some more details about the kaleidoscope that is climate change projects in Africa. On the one hand, it is assumed by the UN Environmental Programme, for example, that climate change infrastructure in Africa could increase GDP on an annual basis by 6.4% on a continent basis from here until 2050. However, that being said, the inverse of this reality is that, or this opportunity, is that there is about a $213.4 billion gap that is required in order for these climate infrastructure projects to materialize in terms of spending. So what we've seen over the course of these past few days is that there's certainly been a lot of discussion between financiers, multilaterals, construction firms such as ourselves, and also investment firms like ours that are actually trying to find the right level of cooperation amongst ourselves in order to make this a reality. What do we look for when we are actually wanting to engage in areas like Africa and in climate resilient projects? The first is we always want to make sure that this is a project that we actually can deliver on, right? That it's in a geography that we feel comfortable working in. Often, many of us who are not from Africa fall into the faux pas of actually assuming that Africa is a monolithic entity, which it's not. There are many differences and many similarities between the various African countries. It resonates quite interestingly with myself, because when somebody comes and says the Arab world, that's 22 countries that range to millions of thousands of kilometers across about 2 or 3 different continents, or 2 continents more specifically. So that's, I think, the second point that's there. The third is that there's actually the sovereign and credit risks. And that's one of the things that we actually very much look forward to exploring, how to work with different multilaterals and different institutions in order to really mitigate these risks. I think over the past few days, one of the things that we've continued to hear, which is quite reassuring, is, are these projects bankable? And beyond the bankability of certain projects, one of the things that I think is important to take into account, and I think I'll close with this, is not just the fact that you can finance a project, but is it a project that is actually required in the magnitude that it's announced? So, you know, you hear about projects and announcements of projects that are worth $5, $6, $10 billion worth of projects across a spectrum of issues that are related to climate change and climate resilience. Does that particular geography, or does Africa in general, actually need the full throttle of that project at inception? Or is it worth exploring taking it in phases as a measure to actually provide a litmus test and then to actually entice further investors and further developers to come in? I'll just say that there's a lot of excitement that I've seen over the past few days. I would be more keen, with companies such as ourselves and other investors, to ensure that, you know, projects like electrification, projects that are related to actually upgrading existing physical assets as opposed to developing new ones, could actually be viewed and developed. So there is a lot of opportunity in Africa, but like most regions around the world, it's ensuring that there's a right fit between what we can provide and what Africa needs.
Thank you, Mohammed. With that in mind, Lamia, I'd like to bring you in. How, therefore, then do we harness some of these opportunities that we know exist? How do we harness the opportunities?
Thank you, Yvonne. Good morning, everyone. Well, to echo what has been mentioned by Mr. Mohamed Al-Ghanim, I'd like to add first in terms of opportunities that, for me, the greatest opportunity is that Africa has the greatest potential to make massive leapfrogs in terms of sustainable development. And as you may know, the annual cost of infrastructure disruption is very high. So resilient infrastructure is designed to anticipate and, you know, in a way to avoid losses from disasters and also to avoid financial losses, of course, to avoid, to save lives and to accelerate infrastructure recovery. So resilient infrastructure is an opportunity by itself. Now, how can we harness those opportunities? I think we need to have a multidimensional approach. One, we need to have the right experts with the appropriate project development teams, because climate resilient infrastructure requires very technical dimensioning. It's more precise than just climate friendly infrastructure. Second, we need to have actually the whole ecosystem working in synergy, not only the investment funds and the project development teams, but also the law firms, the banks, the FIs, and so on. And last but not least, we need to put in place the right frame conditions, the right legal and regulatory framework. And in this perspective, let me share with you what we're doing in Casa Finance City. So Casa Finance City is a government initiative launched in 2010 by the Moroccan authorities. It aims to position Casablanca as a business and financial hub serving Africa. And one of our primary objectives is to attract international investment flows and to direct them to the continent. And of course, sustainable finance has always been in our DNA. I mean, for us, the future of finance can only be sustainable. And what is unique in a financial center, and that is why I hope there will be more financial centers in Africa, what is unique is that it's not only a network of banks or a network of insurance companies or investment funds, it's really the synergy of a whole ecosystem of players, including the regulators. So with that in mind, thanks to the specific framework that we have put in place, we have been able to attract a bunch of companies. Among them, we have today, we bring together the main African investors, African developers in CFC. We have actually the Africa 50 Fund, which is domiciled in Casablanca Finance City. We have Infraco Africa. We have Temis with us, the whole team. So the only one missing is actually the Africa Finance Corporation, which is based in Nigeria. Let me give you some example of what they're doing on the ground. Africa 50 is contributing towards climate resilience through many aspects, through contributing to several climate-friendly infrastructure projects in Egypt, Cameroon, Madagascar. which raises the likelihood of this infrastructure to be resilient. It is also contributing through the implementation of green asset recycling, and last but not least, they are also part of the alliance, the Green Alliance, and I will leave it to Amadou later on to say more about this alliance. Then we have, for instance, Infraco Africa. So with regards to Infraco Africa, I see Gilles here in the room. All of their investments are systematically designed from an engineering point of view to be resilient. So they have many, many projects in Kenya, but also in Zimbabwe, Senegal, and Mauritania, and so on. But to be able to attract those actors, those players, we have put in place a specific framework. What is this framework? Actually, it's about doing business and business, having a business-friendly environment. So when you're part of Casa Finance City, you have several fast tracks to incorporate an entity, to get a license. Also in terms of people flow, you have several fast tracks because, everyone is aware that for this kind of project, attracting the appropriate talent pool is really crucial. So when you're part of CFC, you can hire as many foreign employees as you wish with no restriction. And there are streamlined processes to have the residence work permits and so on. And there is also a streamlined process in terms of capital flow. And last but not least, there is a strong community intelligence because today, all those companies that are part of CFC successfully operate in more than 50 African countries, which makes it one of the strongest, doing business, African community with substantial underground market experience.
Thank you so much, Lamia. Let me bring Tas in. Tas, a CEO of Themis Energy. How are you approaching climate-sensitive or climate-conscious infrastructure development?
Thank you, Ivan, and good morning, everyone. Themis is a project developer and investor in Africa for the last 10 years. And we are proud to be actually part of the Casablanca Finance City. Actually, 2 years after we were established, we were offered to move to Casablanca Finance City to benefit all these good benefits Lamia mentioned. So we are with Casablanca Finance City for the last 4 years. Our main focus is actually developing renewable projects, wind, solar, but hydro is something very specific for us because hydro is baseload and clean energy and also much more cheaper energy source for the countries. So all our greenfield hydro projects are done in line with the climate risk assessments. Yes. And we basically conduct them upfront and then we implement findings in the design and in the build and also in the operations. A good example of this one is our hydro project, 53 megawatt in West Africa. When we joined this project as a lead developer and main sponsor, project had already conducted its feasibility studies. We did a very quick assessment, and then we find out that actually we have to conduct additional studies for environmental impact assessment, but also climate risk assessment. And then outcome of these studies suggested that we have to rethink about the design. Because the original design was a one large dam. Today, the new design, we have 2 smaller dams, 5 times less than the original one dam, and also with 1 demodulation dam, which will be basically regulating the water. And today, when we look at and compare with the original design, we lost 10% of the generation capacity. But we are doing the project with 80% less environmental impact, and we are creating a climate resilient asset. So this is for the new projects and greenfield projects, and then we basically implement them from the beginning resilient to the climate changes. And secondly, recently, being a hydro developer and one of the only private hydro developer in the continent, hydro is difficult to develop and lengthy, and you have quite, upfront expenses to develop hydro projects. So we said how we can do this differently. And then we included refurbishment and retrofitting in our strategy. So Africa has 38.7 gigawatt existing hydro assets, out of which 14.7 gigawatt requires refurbishment because they are more than 20 or 50 years old.
Yes.
This is actually a great opportunity because we can take these assets, we run the climate risk assessment, and then we redevelop them or refit them in line with the resilience. So we actually identified 7 projects, totaling like almost 500 megawatt.
Yes.
2 of them are piloted, and we already started the climate risk assessments and impact assessments. They are being actually worked on. And once we start construction of these 2 projects, we will immediately go other 5. And this is what I think I will say at this point.
Thank you so much, Taz. I want to bring in our institutional and government players in all of this. Boat Mwale, let me bring you in from the Development Bank of Southern Africa. With all of this in mind and the immense opportunities that have been highlighted and discussed so far, what is the role of your institution, or how do you see the role of a development bank institution in building this infrastructure and making existing infrastructure more resilient than it is?
Thank you, Yvonne. You know, it's a great discussion that we are having here. And one of the things that we need to consider in this opportunity is that we are a continent with an infrastructure backlog. We also a continent where there's pockets of aging infrastructure. We are a continent that has experienced climate events. So there are 2 things that I'd like us to really look at from a development finance institution perspective is what are we need to protect what is currently there. And that means we need to support, for instance, we support cities in terms of financing. And cities, are the basis of service, basic service delivery. So there's a change in maintenance regimes. We have to ensure that in maintaining the current infrastructure that we have, we make it adaptive to impact of climate. And that means as development finance institutions, we also have to be open to supporting disruptive technologies. So that is going to be an important part to that. Secondly, it's the opportunity of building new infrastructure. And as a development finance institution, it's critical for us that when we are in projects, we ensure that these projects are climate resilient projects. And that means we have to ensure that within our processes, within our due diligence processes, we get the technical assurance on this. Because climate resilient infrastructure is about ensuring that what we're putting on the ground now will be able to withstand any climate event in future. Yeah. And we're not only focusing on climate resiliency, we're taking it a notch up. It's about smart climate resilient infrastructure, and that's where we are seeing the opportunity, especially in our cities. And from an economic perspective, the answer lies in unlocking Africa's value chain. You see, as a development finance institution, development impact is about economic growth, job creation. Yes. Those are important aspects of what we engage in. And it would be a lost opportunity if, as Africans, we embark on building smart climate resilient infrastructure without creating value chains within Africa. And that is what we then, as the development finance institution, have to drive. If we're going to be making these investments, what does it mean for the communities where these projects are going to be implemented from a job creation perspective and also from an industrialization perspective. So for development finance institution, it is very clear, yes, we need smart, climate resilient infrastructure to be built on our continent. And as we do that, there must be economic development and there must be job creation. That means we do not compromise SDGs to achieve NDCs. What we do is we optimize the achievement of SDGs and NDCs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Masako. That was extremely well articulated. Amadou, let me bring you in from the perspective of a Development Finance Institute and as the Special Envoy for the Green Alliance on Infrastructure. How are you approaching this issue? I mean, the opportunities are clearly there. Yeah. What is your role and how is it being approached?
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Great pleasure to be here today. The Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa will be a key partner of all these institutions, governments trying to really develop, prepare, structure, and implement green infrastructure in Africa. And when you're doing that, automatically it has to be also resilient green infrastructure in Africa. So the African Development Bank, the Africa 50, the African Union, and other partners got together to create this alliance so that like-minded partners can work with government and the private sector to raise the project preparation and project development money that is necessary to build a portfolio of $10 billion of green infrastructure assets on the continent. They could be greenfield or brownfield, the assets retrofitting, for example, in hydro. It's a very good example. And this alliance was launched at COP in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. And since then, we've already gathered a lot of interest from philanthropy, from the multilateral development banks, the regional development banks, but also from some donor countries. And about 20% of the money that we need actually will come from African institutions, which is a big signal to the international community. And we are targeting at COP in Dubai to have a signing ceremony during a major event where we will really announce the commitments made for about half of the funds that we need to start really implementing these projects from next year. The pipeline is already very strong, and we've seen a lot of interest of partners, but in particular, the philanthropy. So what we have is $100 million of project preparation money. This is grant money that we provide to the public sector, essentially, to do the planning, to come up with the strategy, to come up with the pre-feasibility studies, so that the private developers can risk some of their money, and the alliance also co-invest with those private developers. So it's a $100 million grant for the public sector to prepare upstream, and $400 million blended finance vehicle that will co-invest with private developers. The alliance will not be implementing alone projects. We'll be working with Africa 50, with a cornerstone partner of this alliance and a fund manager of a big chunk of these resources. And the rest of the money will be managed by well-established regional and international developers, competent developers that have experience in Africa, that have closed transactions, that have strong teams, that are focused on green infrastructure, in particular in Africa. And the blended finance facility has grant resource, has a junior equity and senior equity. So we are having blended finance where the grant providers will help reduce the losses and the risk of the private investors and to ensure that they have a minimum return that will make them interested in putting their capital to work. And so in Dubai, hopefully many of you will be at the COP, and if you are, we'll definitely welcome you to that major session where we will really do the hard launch of the initiative with the initial funds that are mobilized and start work hopefully in Q1 and Q2 next year. This is the AFDB, Africa 50, African Union, and all these other partners, donor countries, MDBs, RDGs working together to increase the portfolio of bankable green infrastructure projects in Africa that will help Africa fast-track path to net zero, but also help Africans have access to modern, reliable, and sustainable infrastructure. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amadou. My next question is to yourself, Mr. Amrani, CEO of Ithmar Capital. What is the role of the Sovereign Development Fund, and how does the fund align with what we've been hearing and enhancing the building of climate-sensitive infrastructure? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. To begin, I think that it is imperative to stress that climate-resilient infrastructure is not just a choice, but a necessity to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and ensure the long-term development and sustainability of African continent. We must underscore that infrastructure development should be aligned with the climate change consideration as it directly impacts our region's socio-economic development and environmental well-being. The opportunities within the climate-resilient infrastructure, I'm convinced, are not only about safeguarding our environment, but also about driving economic growth, job creation, and ultimately improved living standards for our citizens in our continent. It is also crucial to emphasize that the development of resilient infrastructure plays a pivotal role in integrating continent's economies to the rest of the world, as highlighted by His Majesty King Mohammed VI in his speech a few days ago. Indeed, the African Atlantic coastline, for example, has the immense potential to open Africa to an intensify ties with the American continent if projects are considered with a continental view. Opportunities in transport, logistics, water desalination, blue economy, among others, are massive in this. And this is the approach that has been taken when structuring the Morocco-Nigeria gas pipeline as an example. To understand the roles of sovereign wealth fund can play in the development of a resilient infrastructure, it is important to analyze the nature of those found worldwide and across the continent. In Africa, most of those funds, if not all, are strategic development ones. As opposed to stabilization or diversification funds, they have a mission to get engaged at early stage and develop projects aligned with their national strategy sectors or sectoral strategies. Their long-term investment horizon and their mission focused on creating wealth for the benefit of future generations are perfectly aligned with sustainability and resilience and instrumental in shaping the continental development trajectory. This involvement needs, in our opinion, to ensure that projects are not only financially viable, but also environmentally responsible, contributing to their countries and to their continent's long-term sustainability. To achieve this, sovereign funds get involved in projects early stage and play a crucial role in project preparation and development, working with various local and international stakeholders. They consequently serve as a bridge between the public and the private sector and have the unique capability to channel private capital into priority productive sectors such as infrastructure. By way of an example, Ghana has a dedicated sovereign fund to infrastructure, GGIF, that plays an important role in developing and de-risking projects, and that is supported by a number of institutional investors and DFIs. Similarly, the sovereign fund of Djibouti, Senegal, has recently developed solar plants supporting their national renewable energy strategies. In this context, sovereign funds can play an important role, as I said, in catalyzing and developing new sectors, critical to the energy transition, such as hydrogen, as for the case of the sovereign fund of Egypt, that is driving the strategy, the national strategy in this sector. Sovereign funds can also be involved in creating the appropriate enabling environment for infrastructure projects as developing an adequate PPP, private partnership framework to foster the investment in their respective countries. So I will stay here for this first quote.
Thank you so much.
Ivan, can I
Yes,
add?
please come in,
Yes,
Tass.
actually, I fully agree with you. And we started a new partnership with Sovereign Wealth Fund in Djibouti. And we are developing together the cluster of projects in the economic zone at the Port Authority's land. And we will be putting 15 megawatts solar, a desalination plant, and also LNG storage, coupled with bottled cooking facilities. And it gives us great comfort to partner with the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Djibouti. They are 20% of this cluster, we are 80% investor, and it gives us incredible comfort to be in the country with the Sovereign Wealth Fund of the country.
Great, thank you. Amadou, please come in.
Yeah, and
Yes.
maybe I add to that the fact that the associations of sovereign wealth funds in Africa are also partners in the Alliance for Green Infrastructure. They can benefit from the money of the Alliance because they are very competent project developers, local project developers, so they can benefit from the Alliance funding. So this is number one. And number two, some of them that have more resources can also come to the project finance part of the Alliance, because the Alliance is project preparation, project development, and project financing once the projects are well developed, and we'll be working with the sovereign wealth funds who are very strategic partners of the Alliance.
Thank you, Amadou, and this is very positive to hear. I wanted to come back for our second round of questions and back to Mohammed, because you, when we spoke earlier, you wanted to make a point about the critical importance of South-South investment. Please.
So I think, this panel has been an attestation to the fact that the Global South actually has a lot to offer to itself and probably to the world, right? So, and I think we've long undermined that. We've propagated ourselves as being equal players to the development of the world, and I think we've sort of oftentimes been either told that there will come a day where we might be taken seriously, or there might come a day where we actually we just have to sit back and learn. And I think all the esteemed panelists today have just probably started to prove otherwise, if not more. I mean, with the question of global South to South sort of partnerships, particularly as it relates to Africa, I think from a geopolitical sense, there has been a significant sort of tussle between different international global powers who have been wanting to invest in Africa in order to sort of expand their geopolitical expansion, if I can use that word without being too politically incorrect, and to maintain their interest in the continent and expand their footprint. So you're seeing a lot of things that are being advanced by the Belt and Road Initiative in China. You're seeing a lot that is being done by the Blue Dot Initiative from the OECD. And they're not trying to outspend each other, but I think the question here is what do they actually want to achieve beyond the actual investment capacity? And companies like ours, for example, that are based in the Middle East, that are based in Kuwait, actually might have a lot to offer, not in terms of perfecting what we could do and better than everybody else, but I think we understand the importance of being committed in the long term to the societies and to the investment that is required for us to be based out of Africa. There's been a lot that's been said today about matters that are related to communities and matters that are related to sort of ensuring that there's the resilience of these assets. And I want to very quickly touch on both of these issues. First of all, the whole conference here is sort of looking at the value, sort of the value chains of Africa. I think that not only from a value chain, but also from a full supply chain, Africa and the Global South has a lot to offer in terms of bilateral and sort of continent-to-continent trade, which is a point that's been raised here. Second, I think, there's an audacity that should no longer be accepted. If we're actually wanting to come to Africa and elsewhere around the world, and we are, we need to come with the understanding that we are not just here to make profit. Right? So we're happy to make the profit. Let's not kid each other. That's one of the main reasons why businesses want to expand. But there is a very important there's a critical requirement to ensure that companies that are investing in Africa are investing in the betterment of the societies of Africa. So one of the things that's very critical and that DFIs are looking at, and more specifically multilateral institutions are looking at in the area of infrastructure, I think there's a lot that needs to be said about the role of women in infrastructure. There are a lot less women engineers around the world, particularly as it relates to that. There are a lot less decision makers with regards to infrastructure development that are from the opposite gender. And I think there's a lot of things that need to be rectified on that end. And I think finally, the last point here is to also make sure that we're as these DFIs and as these multilaterals and private institutions such as ourselves are looking, I think there's an important aspect to realize and to distinguish between what the world thinks Africa needs and what Africa actually needs. And I think we've reached to a point where we actually need to look at people in the eyes and say, we don't need anyone to dictate what we need. We know exactly what we want, and you're either willing to join on board, or as a Global South, we have the capacity to really wield our energies together to develop that for our own intents and purposes.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Lamia, let me bring you in because Mohammed has sort of touched on where I wanted to go in this conversation about the risks and the challenges and the perception about the continent. Maybe take us through what you have sort of seen and experienced and how to maybe overcome some of the issues raised by Mohammed.
Well, thank you, Yvonne. There are several challenges and risks that span from high level to very operational ones. First, nearly 80% of infrastructure projects in Africa are simply not getting off the ground because of the lack of capacity. So first we need to build capacity, and so it's by itself, of course, a challenge. And as a consequence, there is another challenge, which is that it's really difficult to attract the risk-taking developers and investors that are willing to invest in infrastructure projects in Africa at a very early stage. Or now, this early stage is really important and complex. And we have, we saw that in so many examples in Africa, in Casa Finance City. There is another challenge, which is that Africa is a fragmented continent with complex economies, diverse legal and regulatory frameworks, and a lack of robust market data and intelligence. And here I think that the African continental free trade area could be a game changer, but we still have a long way to go. So maybe in the meantime, we could use financial centers to help support the attraction of those investments. And that is why, and now I will put the hat of Financial Centers for Sustainability Network, because I have the honor to serve as a chair in this UNDP Financial Centers for Sustainability Network, which is the network of the world's green financial centers born out of the G7 presidency. It represents today 80% of global equity markets, and we launched an African chapter within this network, and we have been helping some government in creating their own financial center bodies. So for instance, in Nigeria, they launched what they call the FC4S Lagos. They even took the brand of FC4S. So just to say that, I mean, these ecosystems, these financial centers can really foster and encourage, facilitate doing business for investors. Then there is also, I mean, a big frustration, a challenge, which is that, you know, we have heard a lot about those $100 billion dedicated to emerging countries. We don't see any progress. I mean, they were more directed to Asia and to mitigation than to Africa for adaptation. So we need to walk the talk now. And I think that we should, this is something that we should follow for sure, but there is a risk. The risk is that if we attract those international investments, we need to work towards a convergence of the frameworks, taxonomies, and so on. But what could seem like an easy rule for a mature economy could end up jeopardizing a less mature one. I'm talking about the indirect impact and, you know, the unintended consequences that all these frameworks, taxonomies could have, because we're talking about sustainable development and sustainable finance. So it's really important to take into account regional specificities and continental specificities. And I think it's the only way to achieve a just transition.
Thank you so much, Lamia. Tas, how do we address some of the points raised by Lamia? You also wanted to make the point about hydropower in particular in relation to this. Over to you.
Okay. Obviously, when we look at today the generation mix in Africa, 17% is coming from hydro. And by 2040, it is expected to raise the 23%. So, which means that it is a powerful source of generation of power. Today, when we look at existing capacity, half of this capacity is built 50 or 20 years ago. Obviously, 50 and 20 years ago when they were built, climate resilience was not the issue and nobody was talking about it, that measures were not taken into account when these plants were built. And majority of these power plants are run by the governments. Therefore, maintenance is neglected. So given the latest disasters in the world, in China and in Brazil, in terms of the dams, I think it is urgent for us to basically focus on this existing capacity and regain this 14.7 gigawatt. I would like to really ask this question. Yes, we can do solar, or we can do wind. Like it is told by some people, you have to do more solar with batteries, you have to do more wind. But I am asking, how many years and how much resources are going to take to put 14.7 gigawatt on the ground with solar or wind? Refurbishing, retrofitting this 14.7 gigawatt is a game changer for Africa, and we have to focus all together. I think the most important action at the moment is looking at this existing power plants, not just only 14.7 gigawatt, but all 38.5 gigawatt, and basically run a climate risk assessment and understand what are the findings, what needs to be done. Obviously, this will require additional financing. So this cannot be only with the private money. This cannot be only with the government investments, and I am very happy to hear Amadou mention blended financing. I think this is what we should be doing next, and then we should basically regain the capacity at hand. Yes, I am not saying that we should stop greenfield projects, but we should not neglect actually something existing, and then easily we can regain.
Thank you so much, Tas. Amadou, let me come back to you then on Tas's point about blended finance. So how then do you create this enabling environment that we're trying to talk about from the perspective of the Alliance and the work of ADB?
Thank you very much. As I said, that the $100 million for Project PREP will help the governments to really put in place that enabling environment to hire the right resources to support the government also in doing so, have the right reforms, the PPP reforms, the regulations in particular in the energy sector. So that envelope will be supporting the countries to do that. And I could not agree more with TAS with the need to really refurbish and tackle the quick wins, because those are quick wins. And I know the bank is already involved in some of those transactions in Central Africa. And across Africa, we have those type of hydro projects. But also the greenfield projects also needs to be tackled as well. This morning, I was chairing a boardroom for a $4.5 billion hydro project in Mozambique with a transmission line also of 1,300 kilometers that will help Mozambique, but also the regional utilities sort of meet their requirements. And for us, those are priority projects also that the bank and the alliance will be working on to bring them to closure. We have the Inga Dam also. That one is a massive project with a low-hanging fruit of about 4,800 gigawatt. And this is a project that has low impact also on the environment and social. You don't need to build a dam for that phase, which is Inga 3. It's a runoff river, basically initial project. And then you can build on and go have more than 40,000 megawatt of hydro. The beauty of having all this base load with hydro is that you can then add more solar, add more wind projects as well, and do more green hydrogen if need be in the future for with Africa. And I think that the critical aspect, it was mentioned by Lamia, is really the capacitation of government. You know, it will be hard to capacitate all the branches of government.
Yes.
You know, I've been there. When I was Minister of Economy, we needed to do a lot of reforms, raise a lot of money, mobilize the private sector. We did not have all the stuff we needed within the government and pay them the salary that we needed to pay. We worked with a foundation that gave us a facility to hire top-notch professionals and pay them private sector salary outside the budget of the government.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to work hands in hand with the existing staff of the government and to do all these reforms that we managed to do in 3.5 years and mobilize resources. And if you cannot do that, you can work with the sovereign wealth funds. If you have a strategic investment fund in the country, that fund usually has the resources to attract the right talent and work on behalf of the government and develop those projects on a fast-track basis with the private sector. Again, in Senegal, Francis, for example, developed 4 solar projects with the private sector in record time. What I'm advocating is that capacity building within government is absolutely critical. If we are to fast-track this project, if we are to fast-track the reforms, and an important point also is domestic resource mobilization.
Yeah.
We cannot be just expecting the international community to finance all our projects. We need to increase the debt, the tax to GDP. In many countries, it's extremely low. Some countries you have 8%, some countries maybe 16, 17. Only 1 or 2 countries you have more than 25%. And we want to increase our rating, increase our borrowing capacity, okay? And then have a cheaper borrowing cost as well. We have to mobilize more domestic resources. It does not mean to tax the same people and increase their taxes. We have to widen the tax base so that everybody should pay a small or decent tax rate. But often in our countries, you see the same group of companies or taxpayers are getting taxed all the time. Tax inspectors goes always to the same people instead of widening the tax base and raise more domestic resource mobilization to enable the government to put more money in infrastructure. The private sector alone cannot solve the problem of infrastructure in Africa for many years to come. The governments would have to mobilize their own resources to invest alongside the private sector.
Thank you so much, Amadou. What is the solution then to overcoming this capacity deficit that you explained, which seems to be so fundamental to actually getting anything done?
I mean, you can, as I said, work with some foundations that could be willing to do it. Probably some development partners can mobilize technical assistance money to support the government. For the Alliance for Green Infrastructure, the first facility, the 100 million, can provide some of those resources, hire some resources for the government, but also setting up units that can be dedicated to doing certain work with different contracts to attract some talent, I think could be also a way of doing it, but it's something that we have to do if we would like really to fast track what we need to do in Africa. And countries that manage to do it manage actually to mobilize a lot of resources. If you look at in Asia, you look at, whether in Singapore, whether it's in Middle East, or even in Morocco, you have some entities of the government that are working also like the private sector and that are dedicated to that sort of work. I think in many countries in Africa, in particular the low-income countries, they need support in that to attract more private sector money into their economies, but also to succeed in domestic resource mobilization.
Thank you, Amadou. Bwatmel, I'm going to bring you in. This is an investment forum. We're talking about how to develop climate-sensitive infrastructure for the future of this continent. What is the connection to job creation and opportunities for people? Because when you talk about this issue, people may be concerned, may be worried that this focus on climate change or preparing for what is to come vis-a-vis climate change can affect or impact their livelihoods now and in the future. So what is the connection between the focus on building climate resilient infrastructure and how that will actually translate to economic development and job creation and opportunities for people?
Thank you, Yvonne. I think I had touched a little bit on that when I responded earlier. What, around that, it's when I look at what we have achieved as a development finance institution, and I'm hearing, some of the challenges that have been raised by the panelists. South Africa is a sterling example of how collaboration between government and DFIs, and also how policy certainty and creating the right regulatory environment can actually mobilize funds. I'm going to give an example of what we did in South Africa with the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program. That program alone mobilized more than $20 billion in energy projects within South Africa. And the office that actually manages that program is based within the DBSA. It was a collaboration between the Department of Energy and the DBSA, where we actually worked together to create this enabling environment. It enabled, domestic fund mobilization. It, enabled international funding as well. And that is the power of collaboration. And when you provide that energy, security, it also, enables economic development as well. So these things that we are suggesting are not far-fetched. We have demonstrated that it can be done. Us as a DBSA, we do not believe in project by project. We believe in a programmatic approach to infrastructure development because that enables acceleration, that enables catalyzation and crowding in of the private sector. For instance, not only have we done the independent renewable energy program, we have now developed an embedded generation investment program. What does that mean? This is enabling, companies and mining houses to generate their own energy. So now, entities can generate their own energy and actually feed that back into the grid. And our government has done very well in, opening up the market for generation. And this is going back to what Amadou says in terms of the role of government to open up these opportunities. And now we're seeing a pipeline of projects, around embedded generation. The third thing is when we, there's an opportunity in green financing, especially for the continent. As DBSA, we are accredited with GCF and GEF. And just as much as, the talk has been around energy, there's also water. We have recently secured more than $235 million from the GCF, and going back to the development element. It's not just for projects. A portion of that goes to project preparation. And that is key. So what that program does that we have developed is go to support and enable the development of projects in the region, and to also enable private sector participation for investments in water. So we'll then have, in securing water, energy security, and all of those elements drive economic growth within an environment. All of those elements, create, economic development, job creation as well. So that is one of the things, because for us, we don't do what we do because, we are a development finance institution. It's about using our convening power. It's about working with our strategic partners. It's about enabling and creating an enabling environment for private sector participation, so that it creates a development impact. It creates the jobs, it builds the economy. So all that I have mentioned here goes back to the African child, the African person having access to water, having access to energy, being connected, and being able to travel, because one of the things that we didn't touch on, and due to time, I can touch on that, is all the initiatives that we are doing around e-mobility as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mohammed, and then I'm going to give a mate.
I just want to very quickly say this because I know we're short on time. A lot of the discussion that's happened today, I would caution and I would really use this platform to call upon everyone that's involved in Africa to distinguish between two things, whether with climate resilient infrastructure or infrastructure in general. The difference between imminent requirements and how we deal with those, and between long-term investment. And I think that often we tend to conflate that one might be required in lieu of the other. But I think it's very important for us to really distinguish between both, because the continent really does have imminent requirements right now, and then there's the long-term horizon, and it's important to ensure that one is not conflated with the other.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, for making that distinction. Mr. Amrani, I'm going to give you the final word. How would you assess how the role of sovereign funds is catalyzing and supporting projects and promoting climate resilient infrastructure?
Thank you, Yvonne. As mentioned earlier, the Sovereign Wealth Fund plays an important role in the early phase and in the project preparation and development, which is recognized by all the stakeholders, critical to the infrastructure sector development. concerns about their role and the added value in relation to this, 12 sovereign funds from across the continent joins their hands to establish the Africa Sovereign Investment Forum, ASIF, currently chaired by Itmar Capital. ASIF is a collaborative platform that groups some of the most established and largest sovereign funds in Africa. It seeks to foster cooperation between the members with the objective of increasing capital mobilization for the continent. ASIF's key objective is to work with its members in identifying and preparing large and continental projects. Through the investment platform, the partners are looking to set up. Sovereign funds members will play a key role in the investment platform by being both investor and local sponsor to the projects. By aggregating projects, the platform will address the size and the diversification challenges international money and international investors are facing when considering deploying capital on the continent. In addition, ASIF vision rise of resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and empowered Africa is perfectly aligned with the sustainability and resilience.
And Omaid, I'm so sorry. I know you were in the middle of what you were communicating. We are out of time. You want to just summarize?
I'm sorry, but I will continue because we can afford 5 more minutes for the Africa most important subject, which is mobilizing investment for investment. So very sorry to say, excuse me, but I will continue my quote because I think it's important and we can also ask the
Sure, you go ahead, Omaid.
So I will do it. And you will excuse me, and the organizer also will understand why it is important to talk about that. Okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you for your understanding. So in this sense, ASIF has partnered with UNCTAD to facilitate investment in line to the Sustainable Development Goals across Africa. This partnership is, in one hand, a testament to the dedication of the sovereign wealth funds to drive climate-resilient investment, and on the other, a way to catalyze more sustainable financing for the benefit of the continent. ASIF is keen on playing an impactful role in the various continental initiatives dedicated to sustainability and infrastructure. Indeed, ASIF is also working closely with our partners like AFDB and Africa 15 and the private sector, but also within the Alliance of Green Africa, of Alliance for Green Africa Infrastructure Facility. The Alliance is one of the key players in the continent seeking to raise early-stage development capital in line with the sovereign fund mission, and which is critical to the infrastructure sector. ASIF involvement in Asia is also a testament to the important role sovereign fund can play and seek to play in promoting sustainable projects, particularly in the infrastructure. And in conclusion, climate-resilient infrastructure topic is not a concept. It's a cornerstone for Africa's sustainable development and future prosperity. As sovereign funds, we are conscious of our mission and the role we could play in this and aim to collaborate with the various stakeholders from the public and private sides to make a lasting impact on the sector.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amrani, and thank you to my panelists. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for all that is being done to promote climate resilience in infrastructure on the continent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mohammed.